honor of introducing Katelyn Evans. She's going to speak to us for a few minutes. She is the grassroots coordinator for the Heartbeat Bill. There are a series of pro-life bills going through our Ohio legislature right now, and they're very important. And Katelyn is here today to talk with us about her journey to being pro-life and about what's going on in the Ohio legislature. So without further ado, here's Katelyn.
Wow, I get a microphone. Thank you so much. This is such a privilege to be able to talk to all of you. I put something together. It might be a little bit longer than a couple minutes, but hopefully it'll hold your attention. Where I came from is my mother's womb, but before that, I knew God. He was my father and He loved me. He created me in His image. That is what He tells me. That's what He has told all of us. As we journey through life on earth, we learn many things and come to a multitude of realizations, some that are too astonishing to ignore, like when God works through us. I also came from a family who was loving and religious, and who taught me of our God. My grandfather was the editor of Ohio Right to Life for many years. Before that, he was Voinovich's pro-life liaison. Before that, he was a school teacher. Before that, he was John Ashbrook's pro-life liaison and helped draft and pass the Baby Doe bill, which protected disabled children from maltreatment upon birth. But before that, ultimately, he was my grandfather, who influenced me with his love and understanding. My grandfather loved me, and he loved every baby whose life he fought for so long to protect. He prayed. My grandpa, he prayed. He was a man of God, and he was blessed. God worked through him. He even received the Holy Forerunner Medal from the Archbishop in his work for the pro-life movement. As I witnessed my grandfather die, I realized we don't have much time which we spend on earth. We have a short window, and it was then, in 2008, that I finally realized I must embrace prayer in a way that I never had before. It was my way to know God. Initially, my prayers felt weak. They were short and demanding, but with a little patience and a persistent attitude, my prayers became thankful and full of requests rather than demands. It was then I promised God that if He made me an instrument of His work, I would do whatever it was that He called me to do. Whether it was caring for the elderly, raising a family, starting a youth group, maybe to carry on my grandfather's work, I would let Him work through me. So I prayed this for 3 years. Initially, I just thought, nothing's happening, nothing's changing. Well, He will use me when He wants. And I just kept offering myself to Him. Lord, use me to spread your work, anything you need. But I continued on with my own life, my own plan. The same life that I was telling God He could use for what He wanted, but on my own path. Doing things my way. Looking back today, it was that day which I decided to give myself to God's work. And that He decided to use me. I just didn't notice it at that time. Let me tell you about it. In 2008, my life was in shambles, and I even denied it to myself. I was not making good choices. I was struggling emotionally. I was fighting an eating disorder, and I was putting myself and my wants first. On the outside looking in, you would have never noticed, but on the inside, I was hurting. Immediately, at my request, by just praying, God began to put my life back in order, back on the right path, so that I might be able to work for Him. And He taught me many lessons doing it. The things I will tell you about now are very personal, but it's my testimony to God's power. How I come before you as a sinner, as a follower of God, and as a messenger, that He can work through each of us if we just let Him. If we just ask Him. So, I was living with my boyfriend, not doing the right thing, not making good choices. For some reason, maybe it was my grandfather, I decided to major in politics. I was in college at OSU, and I was continuing down that path, and I became pregnant. I I had to struggle with that decision because a crisis pregnancy is a crisis. But God willing, and through the help of the pregnancy center in Columbus, I chose adoption. But then 3 weeks later, I miscarried. But those life events, the choice to major in politics, knowing what it felt like to choose adoption, and losing my child were God's doing. Having lost the baby meant that I would no longer be with my boyfriend. That event revealed his true colors, a necessary step to get back to the path God had laid for me. But I kept praying, God, work through me for whatever your purposes you deem. And immediately after, I met the man I was going to marry, the very thing God had planned next. Meeting Joe brought much love and healing into my life that I knew it was God's plan, because it wasn't something I had ever imagined for myself. I knew God had orchestrated it. Next, I finished my degree, but not before I experienced the most trying time of my life. I was caught in the middle of an accusation of a conflict of interest during an internship I had. This experience was painful because it brought much slander to myself. But now I see it was only God working through me. He was teaching me and preparing me for what was next. Those things, meeting Joe and experiencing a political warfare, were necessary for God's plan for me. I just didn't see it at that time. Then I began paramedic school in June 2010 thinking, well, this must be what God has next. I've really given my life to him, so whatever he wants. And in doing this, I've had the opportunity and delivered 3 babies. And I've seen many people who've taught me more than I ever thought I could learn. And it's all part of God's plan for me. But at that time, I just didn't piece it all together. All these things which I am mentioning are leading up to one primary thing. But let me rewind here a bit. My grandfather, that guy that loved me and fought for babies like we're doing here today by praying, when I was in 8th grade, Ohio Right to Life was lobbying to pass the partial birth abortion ban. Many of you probably remember that. Well, my grandfather found out that I was going to shadow a hairstylist for career day, and he said, oh, no, you don't. I know who you're going to shadow. And he stuck me with the lobbyist who was going to get the partial birth abortion ban passed. He told me I needed to be like her, and I needed to work towards something bigger than myself. Well, you tell that to any 8th grader, and they're going to look at you funny. But I said, yeah, I know. And as I got older, I read her books. True to Life, What's a Girl to Do While Waiting for Mr. Right. I had some secret plan to somehow be like her. But by 2010, January 2011, I had forgotten that. And that's when she called me. Her, the lady I had shadowed 15 years earlier. God had brought us back together to do amazing things. Once I had given myself to him, he had put this whole plan into full speed. He heard my prayers. He heard my cries for him to come into my life and put me back on track. He didn't let me know at first, but all along this was his plan. He was working through us. What I must mention here is that giving my life to God means no more me doing for me and for what I want. It really is about relinquishing the reins to God. He has the ultimate plan, but it can't be set into motion unless we ask him to. You see, I had a different plan. I served in the Marine Corps for 8 years, and I was going to become an officer. But that plan changed, and it wasn't me who changed it. But that military experience and opportunity to serve all played into this huge ultimate plan that God had. It wasn't until I opened my heart that he could really work. So I guess to sum all that up, I'm going to tell you why she called me. Why that meeting my grandfather had arranged was part of the plan. She had this bill that she was working on, just like the partial birth abortion ban. She needed someone to fill up balloons. Fill up balloons? What? I had a bachelor's degree in political science. I am not blowing up balloons. But somehow, probably God's doing, I accidentally called her back and found myself in the middle of a conversation about 4,000 balloons. And I reminded her, I had shadowed her in 8th grade and she couldn't believe it. She had previously prayed and asked God to bring all the important people to work on the bill with her. and I was one of them. You might recognize her name, Janet Folger. She was the legislative director for Ohio Right to Life for a decade. Her name's now Janet Porter because she's been married since then. So what's this bill and all the balloons? Well, it's the heartbeat bill. I'm sure you've heard of it. The three things it does is it requires the abortionist to perform a test for the fetal heartbeat. It requires him to inform the woman if the heartbeat is present, and if the heartbeat is present, it prohibits him from performing the abortion. It will basically protect babies with beating hearts from abortion. That's huge. And personally, my opinion is that that's God's plan. This is definitely God's work. I think it might be one of his ultimate plans. But what's more God's work is everything that led up to it and set it all in motion. First, my grandfather's role allowed me to learn the truth about abortion early on and how it harms women. Shadowing the lobbyist, I saw early on how the political facet of this battle is with legislation. And I learned about brutal methods of abortion like partial birth. That's not to say the other methods aren't brutal, but the political science degree prepared me for the legislative process. So on and so on. I can link all those events that I told you about to this one bill. And it's just the power of prayer. What I tell you today is a testimony that you're witnessing God's hands. The prayers you say in front of that clinic invite God into our realm and allow him to open the doors around us and those in crisis. I read Abby's book Unplanned in one night. Granted, I stayed up till 3 or 4 in the morning. But I felt God showing me through her story how he wants to work through all of us. Through prayer and commitment, miracles are definitely possible. And God continues to work still. Losing my child meant that I had yet another angel up in heaven watching over me. I see now that God has let good come from that experience of my crisis pregnancy. It was so that I may understand the plight of other women and the feelings that they had and they were challenged with at the time that they have to make such a huge decision. Being able for me to choose adoption it almost wasn't possible, but it allowed me to really feel what it's like to commit to giving up your child. I believe it's in my future to one day lead a crisis pregnancy center because of that experience. But for now, I'm witnessing God's work with this piece of legislation. See, I used to believe in coincidences, but now I see it's God. If it's odd, it's God. It's not a coincidence. Like if you meet someone and then 15 years later they call you up. For example, if you randomly choose a degree that's 100% relevant to the work God calls you to do. In fact, let me go back to this balloon, these 4,000 balloons. We had an event where we were going to deliver balloons to all the representatives to represent the constituent support of the heartbeat bill. Well, we ended up getting over 4,000 orders. So that meant we had to blow up somehow 4,000 red heart-shaped Mylar balloons to deliver to these reps. That's no easy feat. But before that, the Tuesday before we delivered those balloons, we had a press conference about the heartbeat bill. And what Janet comes up with great ideas. And what she wanted to do was she wanted to fill the room that they were going to have the press conference in with the Mylar balloons, so that she could tell the press, hey, come to this press conference. You've never seen anything like this. You've got to be here. Because then that way we could get the bill into the media, right? We get that information to the media. Well, we get there, everything's planned, we've got the logistics set up, everything's laid out. We get to the State House that morning, and the State House director says, oh, we don't allow helium in here. In fact, you can't bring Mylar balloons in here. And I think, oh God, please work us through this. We had no idea what to do. So Janet starts calling and dialing, and all of a sudden we're thinking, oh, how could he let something like this happen? We're just trying to do his work. So she gets a room reserved in the Hyatt. And we go over and we move everything. We move all the balloons, the helium tanks, everything, the volunteers, move everything over to the room at the Hyatt. We fill all the balloons. We had 600 balloons in this one room. We get everything set up, and Planned Parenthood shows up. And we're like, can we help you? And they wanted in. They wanted to stand in the press conference. And Janet told me, she looks at me and she says, look, I'm mentoring you so you can do the next bill, but you never want the opposition at your press conference. She told me about a press conference that NARAL had that she walked into, and she turned all the cameras on her and talking about how harmful abortion is and how it hurts women and how it's not the good choice. Regardless, back to the store so we don't get too far off. We told Planned Parenthood they couldn't, we said, sorry, it's closed to press and legislatures only. Thank you. And they said they were disgruntled and upset, but that gave us the upper hand. If the press conference would have remained in the State House, we would have had to let them in. That is God working. God foiled the whole plan and moved us across the street to protect us. That to me opened my eyes. So, this is really God's work. The heartbeat bill, you might have heard, is controversial because of what it addresses, but it has some enemies who are pro-life. They argue that the bill is unconstitutional. Well, I'm going to tell you that it's Roe versus Wade that's unconstitutional. A recent decision, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, actually used the same language as was put into the heartbeat bill, which stated that a heartbeat represents a living fetus. And that language was not challenged by Planned Parenthood. We did not even realize that language was in that court decision before we wrote the bill. So that there again, that was God. God put all those words together for us. The top pro-life attorneys in the country drafted the bill to withstand constitutional challenge. And I'll tell you what, if it isn't upheld today, it doesn't mean it won't be upheld tomorrow, because we've got Georgia, Right to Life, Arizona, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and many other states that have already jumped on board with the bill and taken it to their legislature. This is going national, just like the partial birth abortion ban did. Do you know that when Ohio passed that bill, it wasn't upheld initially? In fact, it was struck down twice and finally upheld in 2007, only because 30 other states had the same law, and the Supreme Court could no longer ignore what the states were demanding. I think that God gave us the partial birth abortion ban process not to save lives, but to learn how to get this bill through, how to get the heartbeat bill through, because the partial birth abortion ban, technically it doesn't save any lives, because the abortionist just came up with another procedure that they could use. The right to choose isn't really a right, and these women are being misled. Deep inside, women don't want to kill. They don't want to have an abortion, but they're confused, misled, in crisis, and looking for help. The women who've been in crisis and who choose abortion say they were only pro-choice until they made that choice. In fact, we already had 3 women testify before the House who had regretted their decision and said, if only they had heard a heartbeat, to help us convince the legislatures that this is what Ohio women need. People argue we must go all the way to conception. Yes, we must, because that is when life begins. But it's been 38 years, and we aren't much closer. And we need to do something, because the house is burning, and we're losing innocent babies by the thousands each day. If medical science doesn't let us go to conception just yet, let's go to the heartbeat. I use the heartbeat in the field as a paramedic as an indicator of life. That's what it is. It's an indication of life, not necessarily the beginning. If you can get to conception, if we can get to heartbeat, we know that's 18 days. It's not that hard to go from 18 days back to conception. We'll get there. It's going to take some time and some medical technology advancements. See, like I said, God gave us a partial birth not to save lives, but it outlawed that procedure. You know, our laws are conflicting. We can't talk on our cell phones in the car, but we can kill a fully developed human being. Because in Ohio, we all know abortion's illegal for far too far into the development process of the baby, all the way until delivery. So, you know, my sister-in-law is an attorney, and she's pro-abortion. We had a discussion the other day, and she said, you know, if I asked her if the bill makes sense, and I explained to her the heartbeat and that all life is sacred, you know, and she said, well, you know, it does make sense. I guess I'd have to support it. I prayed for her, and I called her back, and I asked her about the legal opinion, and she said, you know, it's probably going to work. And being pro-abort, she agrees. That is odd. It must be God. That's what prayer can do. Point is, there haven't been too many circumstances to call these coincidences in the whole process. Dr. Wilkie, the founder of the National Pro-Life Movement, said it will save 95% of the babies. Senator Lehner said it will save 99%, because most women aren't aware of, you know, the heartbeat and how early on it arrives, how early on it's there. What we can do is pray. Just pray that her heart changes. Just pray that Senator Lehner, who doesn't necessarily support the heartbeat bill, pray her heart changes. Prayer is so powerful. It brought me from a crisis relationship to the full swing of God's work. I don't know how else to tell you all that what you're doing in front of these clinics today and throughout the 40 days of life saves lives, how it's changed people's situations and opinions. But as God has done with my life, at first we don't see it, we don't recognize it. But mark my words, He will use you if you ask Him. You know, the heartbeat bill has 50 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. There are 99. In order to pass the bill, you need to have more than half. Well, if we've got 50 co-sponsors, that's more than half. The next thing that we've got on the agenda for the heartbeat bill is the Heartbeat Summit. It's April 4th at the State House. It's going to be a day of prayer for the unborn in the State House, for the lawmakers and for our legislatures, so they might have the courage to do what's right and not believe the rhetoric about, you know, the confusion that's surrounding this argument. You're going to see things change. You know, we had an economist testify, Jerry Tuma, and he said that if we would have had 52 million additional people in our economy, in our society today, that it would have saved us from this economic turmoil. You know, to me, that just makes perfect sense. In fact, we have some literature and some other information on the table over there. If you're interested, you can grab that. Look, this is the situation. If God's your co-pilot, you need to switch seats. Because when He drives, life, it's at its best without turmoil. I'll speak to that. And another thing I must speak to is the message of love that I want to bring to you today. Love others around you, no matter their beliefs, because they're here for a reason that's bigger than we know. This is God's plan, and ultimately He is in charge. As you embark on the second half of our 40 Days for Life campaign, you're doing the right thing by inviting Him in so that He may intercede. I must tell you, be not afraid. That's what Pope John Paul told us. That's what God has told us. Be not afraid. You have nothing to fear. We are energized. As the grassroots coordinator, I will tell you we are energized. We have a list of more than 30 Right to Life organizations around the state that are supporting the bill, and you are witnessing it. You know, we're all in this together, and at 38 years, 52 million is far too many. Let's do what we can to get the heartbeat bill in motion through the legislature and on Governor Kasich's desk so that he can sign that. Thank you so much for being present today and for all of your